Welcome to the This Gal Travels podcast, the show that helps you travel more, travel easier, and travel better. I'm Trina, and I'm going to be talking about getting off the beaten path when you travel and some strategies for doing so. Some of the cool places I've been and how you can find some really cool places in the places you want to go to. I always put my best pro traveler tip at the end of the show, so be sure to listen all the way through. You don't want to miss it. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to all the major tourist sites when you're in a destination. I do. I mean, when I went to Dakar, we went to the African Renaissance Monument and the Mosque of the Divinity and most of the major sites. And there is nothing wrong with that. But if that's all you ever see of a place, you're not quite seeing the whole place. And there are two different directions to go. Some is always just getting out local, walking the streets and seeing a place for the way it actually is. That's one of my favorite things to do. But that's not exactly what we're talking about today. Getting off the beaten path is going and finding those things that would come up on something like a list of weird things to do here or there. Now, unfortunately, sometimes you look at those lists and it's like the first 3 are kind of interesting and the next 10 are just all the normal stuff to do in the country because they haven't looked hard enough. But these are the kinds of things that we're looking for. When we went to Indonesia, I'll be honest, we never made it to Bali. I mean, I think we passed through an airport on the island, but other than that, we never made it to Bali. The places we did go, though, were Toraja. We went to 4 islands in 2 months in Indonesia. And we did Java, and we did Flores, which is kind of common because that's where the Komodo dragons are. And, you know, it's like you're going to Indonesia, you got to see the Komodo dragons. To me, that was a major site, although for some people that would be off the beaten path. But then we went to a couple other islands. We went to Kalimantan, which is the Indonesian side of Borneo. And yes, it was a houseboat tour to go see orangutans. And we got to go to Camp Leakey. And no, it's not a place no one has ever been before. But it's a place that not everyone makes it to either. And that's the kind of off the beaten path that I'm talking about. Finding the places that not everyone makes it to. And then after we did the orangutan tour, and that one is really great because you're guaranteed to see some orangutans because you're going to feeding stations and these are partially rehabilitated orangutans. If you want the really wild version of orangutans, you can go over to, I think it's Sumatra, and look for those. And that's like real jungle trekking and the, looking up, oh, hey, I see one up there, that kind of thing. And that's great for some people who are more into the hiking and all that. But I had Tim with me, and he was beyond legally blind. He was fairly blind then, and there was no way we were going to be able to do that. So that was our orangutan thing. And then we went to Toraja, which is, I believe it's on Sulawesi. And it was a 10-hour bus ride up a mountain and to get there. And in Toraja, some people will call it the death cult or something like that. It's not. It's a culture where they don't bury their bodies in the ground because then they would run out of farmland. And so they have developed a culture where they bury their bodies in stone. They actually carve out in the cliff sides and in the stone, the graves, but they have these very elaborate funeral rituals that take 5 days. They take years and years to plan. The bodies stay in the people's houses until they're embalmed, but they stay in people's houses until the funerals. And there's all this stuff around this culture, and it's absolutely amazing. And I'll be honest, I saw that on a travel show probably 20 years ago. And then when I'm like, oh, that's right, this is in Indonesia, and we were going to Indonesia. It's like, oh, we have got to go there. That's the kind of thing that gets me excited about travel. What about that? I heard about a shipwreck place, and it's not really shipwrecks, it's abandoned ships, but that there was a ship graveyard in the middle of the desert in Mauritania, and that was in Nouadhibou. And I was like, we're going to be near there because we were coming down through Morocco, and that's like, we got to go to Mauritania. We got to go to this ship graveyard, and then we went to the other side of the country, and I did a camel trek out into the desert. And those were actually written up on the website, which is still at Team Hazard Rides again. It's still from the original name, but I'll put a link in the description. But those were really interesting occurrences. They both had their pluses and minuses. It was a little bit of a rough trip here and there. And we got to see an ancient desert library. These are people who are in talks with UNESCO, but they don't really love the way UNESCO wants to handle their books, and so they're keeping them and preserving them in these desert libraries. And so this is how you get off the beaten path. No, and then I heard about these Buddhist grottos where there was like artwork underground, and that was in China when we went in 2007. And I was like, oh, we got to go there, and that was halfway out in the desert. We actually had to fly in and out of there because it was just the most reasonable way to get to and from it. And that's one of the things when you're planning for off the beaten path travel, you have to leave some extra time. And I'll get to how to plan these things in just a minute. But then you have things like here in Ghana, there's a stilt village, and it's on the far west coast. It's almost to Cote d'Ivoire. My first time doing it, I'll tell you about my first time doing it a little later. It was quite a trek to get out there. And then you can sit there and say, oh, hey, it can be something as simple as going to a fetish market. And I say that because there's even a fetish market in Accra. Even if you're in Ghana, and I'm saying Ghana, but it can be anywhere. But you're in Ghana, you're here for a couple days, and you're in Accra, and you see in the guidebook, oh, hey, there's a fetish market. Well, fetish market is what they would call a traditional market. If you were in Benin, they would just flat out call it voodoo. They don't really call it that here in Ghana. But it's more traditional, and you will see things like animal heads and dried lizards and that, and they use them in traditional ceremonies or for traditional medicine, those sorts of things. And so these are all off the beaten path, and they can even be found within the city, within easy reach of where you're going. And some will take a few extra days to get to. So how do you find these hidden gems, or what you hope are gems? Sometimes they turn out to be bunk, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes you get out there and you're like, that wasn't worth it. Sometimes that happens, but I will say 80 to 90% of the time it's worth it. And sometimes just the trip alone is one of those things where the journey is almost more important than the destination sometimes, because of the people you meet along the way or the experiences you have. So I can say it's, even if you have an occasional failure, it's generally well worth it. This is something that is fun to do when you travel, is find that oddball thing that you want to go, that's just a wild hair of, oh, we got to go see that. And first place I look is guidebooks, especially Lonely Planet. They've always been good at that. They've even been good at things like, we went to go climb Taishan in China, and they're like, well, if you exit the hotel and go to the left and go down halfway around the block, and there's a dumpling house with a red and yellow sign, they have the best dumplings in the area. Well, even that alone is a little mini adventure. You don't know if it's still going to be true. You don't know if it's still going to be there. And, you're looking for this thing. But this is the kind of stuff that Lonely Planet is so good at. And so I do like Lonely Planet books for that reason. I have found, this is a side note, but I have found that I don't love ebook versions of travel guides, because I can't, I highlight things, I make notes, and I do dog ear them, and this because, by the time you finish using a guidebook, it's half out of date anyways. So I don't mind marking up and tearing up guidebooks. On the electronic, I find it a lot harder to bookmark and to go back and find things. And sometimes you want to look at the map and look at this, look at this, look at this. Literally flipping back and forth between pages. So if you can carry the paper guidebook with you, I kind of recommend it. I think it's easier to use in real life. I tried the electronic version. I still have the electronic versions, but honestly, I like the paper ones better. But so I recommend Lonely Planet. Also, to other places you can find these really cool things. Look for blog posts on the places you're going. That thing where I said, the 15 weirdest things to do in such and such. Go ahead and look anyways, but try and find the individual travelers' blog posts a little bit more than the big company blog posts, like, TripAdvisor and all those that come up at the top of the list. Sometimes they have some good things, but a lot of times there's kind of just generic lists. So I highly recommend finding individual bloggers that are doing articles like that, and hopefully they do a good job. The one big name that comes up a lot when you do that, that is actually pretty darn good at it, is Atlas Obscura. That's one of my favorite places to look. I usually have already found the place, and then I go look it up on Atlas Obscura and see what whoever wrote their thing has to say about it. They don't always have a ton of information, but it's a good place to get inspiration and get ideas, especially for things that are not that hard to get to. A lot of people write about things that aren't that difficult. So I like Atlas Obscura website for finding unique things. They are very good at the unique things. And then, of course, YouTube. YouTube is always a good place. When you look up your 15 weirdest things to do in such and such a place, you'll usually see some YouTube videos at the top. And again, try and go with the ones that look like they're done by individuals more than companies, because you're probably going to get a better result. Otherwise, as I say, it's like the first 3 are interesting, and then after that, they just tell you all the same stuff that these are just things to do in the country. Depends on where you're going. Some places will have a lot of videos, and some places will just have a few. Okay, so as I mentioned, when you are planning your trip and you decide you're going to go off on this wild hare and go searching for this thing that you have found, whatever has caught your fancy, and you're like, oh, I want to go find that. You do need to do a little extra planning. Now, I hope you haven't planned your trip so tight that every day has to be hit just perfect. Always leave yourself some flex time, because things will surprise you. Things will take longer than you think. Things that the guidebook doesn't necessarily tell you. Like to get to the stilt village here in Ghana. If you are going from Accra or Cape Coast, you can try and make it all in one day to get out there. I mean, it'd be a long drive if you had a private driver. But if you're doing it by bus, I'm a little bit more of a budget traveler, so I tend to do things on the bus system. And the easiest way to do it, honestly, is to get to Takoradi, pause there overnight, and then grab a trotro heading all the way out to the next stop, was actually Bayin, which is the land side of Nzulezo, which is the stilt village. Now, I will tell you this, even if you've planned it, even if you think you know where you're going, and the guidebook says to do this, this, and this, tell the locals, talk to the locals, ask and make sure that your route is correct. Because my first time going to that stilt village, I was like, oh, it said I needed to get to this town. And so I said, hey, when I got to the trotro station, I'm like, I want to get to this town. They asked me where I was going, and I said that town because I thought that's what I needed to do. Well, I got there, and it turned out that really wasn't where I needed to go to. And that if I had told them at the beginning that I was going to the stilt village, they would have gotten me on the right trotro to get me there. And that was entirely my mistake. So then I had to hire a car. Oh, and this was funny. This was 2003. This was before the road was all paved. Now it's all paved. It's much easier to get there. But this was before the road was all paved. So this guy has this car, a young guy with a car, and I'm sitting in the front, and there's this kid in the back. He's probably 11 or 12, and we're going over this really bumpy dirt road, really, really bumpy dirt road. And every once in a while, he'd open the back door and bam, bam, bam with a mallet and knock the hubcap back onto the car to make sure the hubcap didn't fall off. I'm not sure that it even had all 4 hubcaps, but that one, he was going to make sure it didn't fall off. And so we go really slow over this bumpy road, and we finally get to the station where you get the canoe ride, and at the time it was just a canoe ride out to the village. Well, there was no one there at the time, so we had to wait around for 20 minutes or so while I go found the person that takes care of that, because they don't have a steady flow of people coming in, and they don't know when someone's going to arrive. And honestly, that's kind of the way things work in not just Africa, but a lot of the world. You know, it happened in Indonesia where we went up to someone's food stand and they had to go wake them up from across the street to say, hey, you got a customer. So things go a little more like that sometimes. Sometimes you got to wait for the person to show up, or sometimes you get somewhere and it's prayer time, and so you got to wait for them then. So this was my thing getting out, but I got out to the stilt village. I stayed. It was magical because it was really a different and new experience for me. This was real village life. It was before they had gotten anything near modernization. They were really proud that they had a bathroom, and it was actually more comfortable than you think. But they had wooden box, the hole cut out, and that was for their Western visitors only. Villagers didn't get to use that. That was just for tourists. And they had a little mini store, no refrigeration or anything at that time. I think they've gotten some refrigerators, and a lot of people actually have like car batteries and a little bit of television now because they've been doing very well. As I say, and they have a paved road out there now. So, but it's still a great adventure because the canoe ride, and now they have motorboat, but still it's just fun to do. It's a really fun side adventure. But the thing is I had to allow the extra time. The trip to Takoradi, the overnight in Takoradi, then going there, and I stayed there for the night. And then on the way back was funny because I ended up catching a ride. Well, first of all, I met someone from a similar part of Los Angeles that I live in. Like, we live 20 minutes away from each other while I was making the transition back to the land side. And it's like, you go halfway around the world and you meet someone kind of from your hometown, which is pretty funny. And then they knew of a couple that was teaching German, and somehow they flagged them down, and I ended up getting a ride with them back to Cape Coast. And so I got the ride with them back to Cape Coast. It was funny because at that point they still had like police checkpoints, and they stopped them, and it was whether they were going to get asked for a bribe or not. But I never gave my passport because I didn't want to like get it confused. Well, why do you have this American with you and you're German and blah, blah, blah. But my grandmother's side is German, so I look just German enough to, she must be German too. I kind of get mixed into that crowd. So even getting back was had a little mini adventure to it. A little, what's going to happen here? But so this is the fun of off the beaten path travel. You end up with these little mini stories, and that sort of thing. But you have to leave the extra time. I did one where I went to a monkey sanctuary here in Ghana, and again, that was an extra day or two. When we went up to the Buddhist grottos in Dunhuang, that was definitely a few days out of our trip. So sometimes, sometimes, even if it's the point of the trip, maybe your whole trip is all these quirky little things, and you're not going to see one big thing, and that's completely okay. That's all sorts of fun. But you've got to allow the extra time. And sometimes, as I say, things take longer than you think. If you thought you were going to, make it to Takoradi and to Bayin on the same day, and it just didn't happen because you got there too late or something broke down, you got to leave yourself some space in your schedule. So if you're going to go for off the beaten path, you have to leave a little bit of flexibility in your schedule. And of course, it probably goes without saying, but you do want to group your activities all in the same area. Like in the Cape Coast area here, you can go to Kakum National Park, which is not really off the beaten path, but it's an awesome thing to do. You get to go over rope bridges over a rainforest type area, and you can go it's a nice little, you have an uphill hike though, some stony stairs through the forest, which is pretty cool. But then there's these Posuban shrines. They're not all shrines, but these Posuban that are really cool to see in the Cape Coast area. So if you go off on that adventure, you want to do it while you're in Cape Coast. And that sort of, as I say, goes without saying, but mind how much you can do in one area. Also, sometimes you're going to hire a driver, sometimes you're going to need a local guide, and let them know everything you want to do because they can maybe help you do it a whole lot easier. And if you're going to be staying somewhere overnight, you definitely want to research the choices for accommodations. Because like the Stilt Village has a guest house, and that was the whole point of staying there. But in Senegal, there's a place called Touba, and technically I found like one or two people who were doing Airbnb, but generally the place does not have hotels in that. They have this idea that if you're visiting that someone would take you in, that you would know someone and they would take you into their homes. So they don't have accommodations that I can tell of in Touba for the most part. And so if you were planning on staying overnight, you're going to have to find a town outside, and you're probably just going to go all the way back to wherever you started because of the way Senegal is laid out and where Touba is in relation to things. You probably just go back to the city you started in. But not everywhere has obvious accommodations, or you might need to stay like one town away because either something's inaccessible or it's just flat out too remote and there's just nowhere to stay, or it might be really expensive to stay really close to the thing. So you might want to stay one town away and just go in for the day that you want to visit the place. And going along with that idea of unpredictability, you really don't know what you are going to find when you go to some of these places. Like in Mauritania, you have the capital of Nouakchott down in the southern part of the country. And then you kind of have two roads that go up each side of the country. And the only thing that connects is that iron ore train. If you've ever heard of that iron ore train through the desert, and if you're not in really good shape and a half a shade crazy, you're not going to ride the iron ore train. It's a tough ride. You're going to get iron ore everywhere. It's cold. It's just not a fun ride. So it's not a serious passenger thing. So if you want to do anything on either side, you kind of have to go back through Nouakchott and back up. And it's about a 5 or 6 hour van ride to either major city on either side. And it's a little bumpy and it's a little uncomfortable, and their rest stops are not necessarily the most convenient. I will say, ladies, if you can learn to use a squat toilet before you come to Africa, actually, this was in China and other places too, so in Asia too. So if you can learn to use a squat toilet, your travels are going to be a whole lot easier if you are traveling in slightly wilder places. And sometimes you just have a hillside or a sand dune to use. So definitely a good skill to learn. But not only are sometimes the rides long, they can be bumpy. They can be very bumpy. And so you need to be ready for those sorts of things. You need to be ready for really unpredictable stuff. Like when we went out to see the Buddhist grottos, Tim and I got in this car, and it was a taxi, proper taxi, and we had negotiated a price with him. And we didn't realize what he was saying at one point. And I'll tell you this thing he was saying at the end. But he did this thing where we went off-road all of a sudden. There was this main road, and then we went off-road. And Tim and I, without saying anything to each other, we both got this preparation of, okay, if they try and mug us, we're going to beat the crap out of them. We're going to fight back was our preparation. And we were sort of tense through the whole thing. And we go out and we go back behind this farmhouse kind of thing. And the grass was like, 3 feet tall. And it's just, it's like it was a worn path. So it wasn't non-existent or anything. But we both got a little tense. And then we finally come out the other side and we realized what he was doing. He was avoiding the toll booth. It was the trick for taxi drivers to avoid the toll. And going out, it didn't matter. We went right through. But going in, he was avoiding the toll booth. And it was just funny. And it was funny because it was that Chinese accent that I'm not going to make stereotypical fun of, but I will say the whole time he was saying one low price to say that he was going to wait for us at the grotto until we were finished with our tour and then bring us back, so that it was a round trip. And when we initially hired him, we weren't 100% sure if that was the case or if we were going to have to hitch a ride back with someone else. And it turned out, though, he was waiting for us, and he was saying one low price the whole time. These are the memories you get. You get this guy going out behind the farmhouse when we were ready for a fight if necessary, and it turned out he was just avoiding the toll booth. And we were both thinking the same thing. We never said anything to each other. So there can be a lot of unpredictability in things. That's why sometimes, as I mentioned, you're going to want to hire a local guide, and sometimes you absolutely have to. Like in Toraja, you can't just go wandering around and learning about this funeral stuff without someone to guide you. So I had prearranged the guide before we ever took the trip. So it was someone I met in a Facebook group, And he was great. He was awesome. He did a great job. But there's also guides. I mean, they're waiting for you when the bus arrives in Taraja. There's just a bunch of people being guides, and they all pretty much have similar access in the sense that they can take you to the funeral. One day, there's 5 days of funeral. They usually take you to one of the middle days. And they can take you around and show you all the different, the graves are really interesting because they have these dolls and figures, and they can tell you about it. And there are a lot of sanctioned guides. So anywhere you go, though, be prepared to hire a local guide, because you will get more out of it, and you can't always do everything on your own. Sometimes you might get lucky and hook up with another traveler that knows the route or knows how to get around a little bit better, and that may be quite sufficient depending on what you're going to see. First time I went around to the Posuban, I was actually lucky because I met a fellow traveler who had been doing this for a lot longer than I had, because this was my first real solo trip and my first trip to Ghana. And he knew how to get around, and that was, again, back before the roads out to these places were paved. And he knew how to work the bush taxis. He knew a little bit of the local language, and I just lucked into having a fellow traveler that said, "Oh, hey, that sounds cool. I'll go with you." And so it helps if you're open to those kinds of things. That happens when you travel. So you meet people, and sometimes you hook up and do things for a day or two. And so always be willing to be open, be flexible, be ready for the unpredictable. That sounds weird, but be ready for the unpredictable. By the way, if you're enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate it if you would share it. Let your friends know about it. Blast it out on whatever your social channels are. I'd really appreciate it and help it grow. And that would be a really good help. So if you're enjoying this, thank you. I appreciate the boost. One of the advantages of having a local guide and going off the beaten path is you get a glimpse of local culture. You don't usually get to totally immerse yourself in it, although you might be able to stay with a family for a few days. I still sort of consider that a glimpse, although it's a better look at local culture. But things like Taraja, as I said, to attend the funerals and that sort of thing, you needed a local guide because there was no way you're going to find your way around otherwise. But I will give you a few tips here on when you are in different cultures that are dramatically different. Like, let's say you go out and you visit a village somewhere, and this goes for, or just a rural place. It can be, you can call it a village, you can say rural, whatever you prefer, depends on where you are, what you might call it. But let's say you're out in a village, and you are offered something to eat or drink. Most of the time, say yes. Now, of course, if it's something you think is going to make you sick, politely decline. Like when I went out to stay with the nomads in the desert, they offered me something that I think was it was either goat milk or camel milk. But she had been shaking it. So, of course, they were Muslim, so it wouldn't have been fermented, but they were doing something with it and mixing it. But there were two problems with that. And one might not have been a problem. Of course, it wasn't pasteurized. And who knows, what they were doing to it might have just made it safe. And that was less of a concern for me than I'm both lactose intolerant and allergic to milk. And I was just afraid it was going to have some bad effects on me. So and they completely understood that. It wasn't my fear of it. It was, I truly thought it was going to make me sick. But if it's not something that you feel that way about, even if it's something that's a little bit odd, as long as you don't think it's going to make you sick, I say accept the hospitality. Say yes, try it. If they say, do you want to try palm wine? Give it a try. If they offer you some food, even if it looks unfamiliar, give it a try, And honestly, if you don't like it, first of all, try and be polite about it. But if even if you end up accidentally making a bad face or something, they'll probably get a laugh out of it. You're a foreigner. They know that you're not going to necessarily like their stuff. But just remember that if someone's offering you food, they're offering you friendship. And so if you ever get an opportunity in, as I say, a village, generally accept what's offered. even if it's just sitting around and having a tea and that sort of thing. And there is that 3-cup rule on a lot of things like tea and coffee. So you might need to drink 3 cups of something. But as I say, as a general rule, say yes more often than you say no. And if you're worried about time, because you have to be somewhere at a certain time, see if you can work it in anyways. Because those are the experiences that are usually more important than the exact time that you check into your next hotel. And if you are fortunate enough to be somewhere during a festival or during some sort of ceremony, I say participate as much as you can. And this really depends on the type of ceremony it is. And that's why I'm saying as much as you can. For example, like when we went to a voodoo ceremony in Benin. And they have a thing there where if the guy in costume comes up to you, you have to give him an offering. And see, I had the offering stuff, but I was like a couple seats away from Tim at that moment, and he didn't know about it. And he didn't know, as I say, he was mostly blind. And so he didn't quite see what was going on. And the thing is, the guy tried to take his stick, his seeing stick, and Tim was like ready to fight him on it, because Tim wasn't quick enough with we weren't quick enough with getting an offering out to the guy. And it got explained. It got handled, it got explained. But see, if you don't give the offering, they take something from you. And I'm not sure, except in the case of Tim, because he was blind, I'm not sure you'd always get it back. You'd probably get it back, but I'm not 100% certain of that, because that's the rules of that ceremony. When the costumed person comes up to you, which is essentially that deity coming up to you, they represent the deity that they are costumed as. You need to give that offering, and you need to give it fairly quickly. And they're actually happy to have you participate some, but learn the rules before you go. As I say, we weren't prepared for them to go to Tim, and we didn't get the thing out fast enough, so that was the confusion there. But be prepared. Again, this is where local guide is important, or a friend. If your friend is your guide, that's great. But so when we were going in, though, we did buy some candy. Be ready to do offerings. This last time in 2019, when we went to the Posuban, this was a funny one because my camera had stopped working. It was giving me a hard time, and couldn't figure it out. And we actually went and we got a priestess to come do a ceremony, and we had to go buy some peach schnapps to do as an offering at the shrine and all of that. And she was doing it, and she was doing the praying. And as I say, you can say that it was just, I finally figured it out, or you can say it was divine inspiration. But I figured out what was wrong with the camera and got it fixed during the ceremony. So as I say, I don't know if it was just, oh, hey, my brain finally turned on, or if, hey, maybe the ceremony worked, And then there was the thing, again, here in Ghana, but this is up here in Tamale, is they have the fire festival. And it's funny because my friend Abdullah, he took my camera for a bit and got some deep in the crowd photos for me, because I think he thought I was going to stand on the outside and watch people. But no, I got in. And here in Ghana, and especially in Tamale, people are really accepting and welcoming in. So no one had a problem when I had the giant torch and it was on fire, and I was marching and chanting and dancing right along with them, as well as taking video. I did both. And I was right in the middle of the crowd. Did the same thing in Myanmar, in that little window where Myanmar was free and open. We went to the water festival there. That was another one of those crazy harebrained things I did. We were in Thailand. I said, oh, hey, there's a water festival over in Myanmar. Let's go. And we went and spent a month in Myanmar just because I got wild hair. And it was fun. It was all sorts of fun, but I dove right into the center of it all. For as much as at the fire festival, I had a little bit of ash in that coming down on me, and was right in the middle of everything. And, some of the guys were dancing, and they have these, costume swords. They're still metal, but they're costume swords, but they scrape them on the ground and they get them to spark a little and that sort of thing. And I guess some people get a little scared or intimidated by that. They're just having fun. You can tell they're just having fun. And in Myanmar, I was right in the middle of everything. Tim did it one day. He wasn't ultra fond of it, so he left the rest of the days of the water festival to me. But yeah, I went and I had my little waterproof, my cheap version of a waterproof camera, and I got in the thick of it. And see, those were places where I could fully dive in. The Voodoo Festival, it was more let it happen to you. If it comes to you, then it comes to you. But I wasn't going to get up and start, dancing voodoo style and join in. That wasn't my place. But the Fire Festival and the Water Festival were absolutely, anyone can join in. They were happy to have everyone. They were both just big street parties. And I say dive in. If you are fortunate enough to be in a party, a ceremony, and it is something where you can fully dive in, dive in. If you are invited to dance or participate, then go, do it. Absolutely participate. If it's somewhere in between, just gauge it. As I say, ask your guide or your friend and see what feels right. Don't try and take over the show. Don't try and be, oh, look at me, I'm the outsider doing this local thing. Just join in at the level that you're invited to join in at, as I say. And then if that's full-blown join in, then full-blown, participate. Because, when else are you going to get that chance? When else are you going to get that opportunity? And sometimes, as I say, it can happen right here in the city. The Fire Festival was right here in Tamale. But sometimes it's further out. Sometimes you go somewhere. The Water Festival was in Mandalay, right at the palace, actually. It went around the palace area. So sometimes you don't have to go real far to get to things. And then sometimes you are a little bit out there. But yeah, participate as much as makes sense. But don't make it about you. Don't make it about you unless they make it about you. I hope that makes sense. Be a good guest, I guess is what I'm saying. So, what are some of the drawbacks of off the beaten path travel? Of course, as I said, sometimes you plan to get to this place and it's not all it was cracked up to be. We went to go see this Buddhist wishing tree. I think it was in Macau. We were in Hong Kong and we had to take the little ferry ride across. And we get there, and the thing is, so many people had put so many wishes on it, it had kind of almost killed the tree. And so they took everything down, and now they were hanging around, and you put your wish in the little slot. And it was still, the effect was lacking. But I understand it, They were protecting the tree, and hopefully it would live and come back and be strong again. So sometimes it's not all it's cracked up to be. The ship, the one ship that that had sparked my imagination, the one shipwreck that I wanted to go see in Mauritania, after we got there and with the difficulties Tim was having, because he was recovering from a broken leg at that point too, it felt like it was going to be too far out, and it might not even be there anymore because they were cleaning things up. So there was a chance it wasn't even there anymore. And it was going to be a long, difficult drive. And so we opted to find our shipwrecks in another place. So sometimes things don't go as planned. As I said, you sort of have to be flexible and understand it's not always what you expect. And then there are those times when the trek might be more difficult than you expect. There was this village we were going to go see, and it was in the mountains, and we had been told it was just 2 or 3 kilometers, which not that far, right? Well, it was more like 6 kilometers, and the way was a lot steeper than we realized, and it was raining. It was starting to rain, and we had not come prepared with enough food and drink, especially if Tim's blood sugar went low, and which exercise would do that. It would bring his blood sugar down. And we just realized we weren't not there. Were we prepared? But it wasn't even a come back the next day and do it better prepared without the rain. It was going to be too difficult. It was just going to be too difficult for us. So we actually opted not to do it. That was in Indonesia, and we were a little disappointed. But we ended up staying in this oddball place that will forever be dubbed the Spider Hotel. And I am not joking when I say it was that big around. That big around being a good 5 to 6 inches across and carrying an egg sack. One more reason I'm just going to bring up real quick in that unexpected nature of things. Another reason to have a local guide is even if you're in a place that has a fair amount of English, if you start getting further out away from the major cities and the major sites, there is probably going to be less and less English if it's a place that also has its own local language. So that's another reason to have a local guide, that they speak decent English and they speak the local languages. They can also let you know if there are any cultural do's and don'ts, especially if they're a little bit more important in the villages. Like a lot of times people in the cities are used to dealing with foreigners, so if you make a little faux pas, a little mistake, it's going to get forgiven. They understand. But sometimes people out in the villages aren't as forgiving. There was one time, and actually I wouldn't call Elmina a village, but it's a smaller city or town. And there is a slave castle there that a lot of tourists go to. But my hands were full, and I forgot about the right-hand rule, because the right-hand rule applies throughout Ghana, not just in the Muslim areas. It's throughout Ghana. They use right hand for everything. Well, my hands were full, and I accidentally gave her money with my left hand, because that's what was free. And I got a sour look from her. Fortunately, I had our driver at that moment. Tim was in the car, and he straightened it out for me. But I absolutely didn't mean offense. I just forgot. I goofed. And because she was a little bit more of a village, rural person rather than a city person, it meant more to her that it wasn't as easily forgiven. So having a local guide can help you smooth those things over, as well as help with the language and warn you of the cultural do's and don'ts before you make the mistake. By the way, if you are traveling anytime soon, I have designed some pretty awesome travel journals. A lot of them are Africa focused, but I have some that are for anywhere in the world, and I will leave a link to them down in the description if you want to check them out. I think they're pretty cool. And I got to tell you this, because I do have an outline here, and I was supposed to tell you some of those travel stories I've already told you. I was supposed to tell you at the end here and be all inspiring, but I told you all the way through anyways. But the first time I went to see the Posuban, as I say, it was a dirt road. The biggest Posuban out there is this Posuban at Mankesim. And the Posuban are a place where the Asafo, the militia companies that protect the town, they meet. They meet there. It's a meeting place. It's also where weapons would be stored if they had to defend the village. Nowadays, it's more of a meeting place than anything. But this one out at Mankesim is 3 stories tall. And as a reference, if you want to know what they look like, first of all, you can go to the website. I will put a link in the description. But my first impression on seeing them, especially the smaller ones, was they reminded me of the kind of structures you would see at a miniature golf course, the windmill and this, that, and the other thing, but African style. My first time out, the trip out to Mankesim now is fully paved, and there's a busy road, so you got to listen to the guy really carefully when he tells you the story, because you get there, and there's a guy there's this Posuban, and it's 3 stories high, and all of the little sculptures in it are telling a story. Some of them are telling the story of the arrival of the people, and some of them are telling moral tales. And my first time there, we had gone out, and it was bush taxi, dirt road, and we get out there, and I am not kidding. There's this guy, and he's got this kind of crooked baseball cap going on. He's missing half his teeth, and one's capped in gold. And he's the village storyteller. And And it was just amazing sitting there listening to him. I understood about half to 2/3 of what he was saying because his accent was a little bit thick. But what was really cool is they had these handouts. They actually had some faded Xeroxes of dittos. I could tell that they had originally been printed on a ditto machine. And then they were these sort of faded handouts that explained everything. And I wish I still had those. They weren't handing them out the next time, but the next time, I'll be honest, the storyteller was easier to understand. And then we're talking 16 years between those trips. So there was a huge difference. As I say, it's all paved now and all that. But that's one of my favorite things about that trip was there was this guy that was just this character, and he was so interesting, and he told the stories with such vigor, and it was just fantastic. And that's why you go off the beaten path. And whatever, the things that excite me might not be the same things that excite you, but whatever excites you is what you should look for. As I say, go looking for when they say the weird things to do, but pick the one that suits you, and you sit there and say, oh, that would be cool to check out. And even if it's but it'll probably take us a 2-day detour, well, why not? Is it more important to see a tourist site that everyone's seen, or this really cool thing that could be a really cool experience? And I'm not saying don't see tourist sites, but if I had to choose between the off the beaten path oddball thing and one more statue of something, I'll take the oddball off the beaten path thing every time. Big statues are nice, but they're big statues. You see enough of them, and and everyone else is standing up looking around. It's like, okay, and then you get the tour. But off the beaten path, you can't beat it. Even, as I say, the stories just getting there and getting back, those alone can be worth the stories, much less what you see when you get there or what you experience when you get there, because it might be more of an experience than a see. Or it could be a combination of both. And one thing about Africa is usually there's a story attached. If you go up to Mole National Park, you often go to Larabanga. And Larabanga has a mud and stick mosque, which I believe is the only one. It's definitely the oldest of its kind in Ghana. But it's more of a Sudanese architecture. And there's the Mystic Stone. And the Mystic Stone and the mosque have a tied together story. And if you go, you should really do both of them and get the full story from both sides. And you should all do that when you go to Mole. That's what I mean by grouping your activities. So you leave, that really just takes an afternoon, but when you go to Mole, you need to leave yourself an afternoon to go do that. But these are things that you want to go to. But as I say, in Africa, a lot of things have stories, and there's almost always a storyteller ready to fill you in on those things. So my best pro traveler tip for today is, on your next trip, find at least one oddball, off the beaten path thing in the destination you're going to, and make it part of your plan. Put it, however many days you need, put it in your itinerary, put it in your plan, and do it. I don't care if it's a bumpy ride that you need to take, or if you need to hire a local guide, or if it means riding a camel out to an oasis in the desert, or to stay with nomads, or any other weird oddball thing that you can find. It all depends on your destination, but find that one thing that not everyone goes to do, and something that interests you, of course, and just make it your own special little adventure. Even if you're on a tour, leave yourself a few extra days, either before or after the tour, to go do this thing on your own if you can. I mean, why not? You only live once. You might only be there one time in your life. Make the most of it. And if you're not in the midst of planning a trip and you don't foresee one in the immediate future, then do the same thing with your hometown. If you live in a small town, maybe you go up to the next city. But whatever city you live near, I guarantee you there are hidden gems, there are oddball things. I'm from Los Angeles, and you could forever say weird things to do in Los Angeles, and there will be lists and lists of all the interesting things you can do all around LA. I mean, even Watts Towers an interesting trip for the day. But Los Angeles has tons and tons of stuff. Any major city, whatever major city you live near, is going to have some unique thing that even if you've lived there your whole life, you never bothered to check out. And so find that weird thing in your hometown and do it. Do it this month. Make it a challenge for yourself that one of your days off this month, that you are going to pick an interesting oddball place somewhere in your hometown and you're going to go check it out. And while you're there, check out maybe also going to some restaurant that's in that area that you don't normally go to. Try something new, try something different, something that you wouldn't normally, maybe a different cuisine that you wouldn't normally try. And if you can find other things to do in the area, it could become a whole new ritual of, hey, we go do this thing every now and again. But find something in your hometown. If you're not planning a trip right now, find something in your hometown that is different and unique and you've never done before. In other words, practice going off the beaten path, even if it's in your backyard. I hope today's podcast has inspired you to try traveling to different, offbeat, weird, and cool places on your next trip. And I thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.